Chapter 2 of Find the Woman. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Find the Woman by Burgess. Chapter 2. The House of the Fortune Teller. How John Fenton went downtown without an object and became involved in a picturesque adventure with a certain strange lady. John Fenton returned from the office one April evening and as usual gazed long at the picture. He went out with the spell still upon him. It charmed him even in the heated, sordid, commonplace atmosphere of the cheap restaurant where he habitually dined. Aforetimes he had held interrupted, jocose intercourse with Millie, his favorite waitress, but of late Millie's charms had faded. He had begun to notice that her hands and ears were large. After his small, squat cup of adulterated boiled coffee, he took a subway express to Times Square and, as was his wont, wandered down Broadway into the splendor of modern Babylon. New York was waking up to its perfervid night life. The electric signs blazed convulsively, throwing spasms of red and white and green against the darkling sky. The taxicabs grew nervous, hurried, searching here and there like roaches in a dirty kitchen. The women of the shadow began to emerge into the glare, overtly stalking their prey. John Fenton, still wrapped in his dream, walked on unregarding, like a machine. At the opera house he waked up enough to take his accustomed place in a shy corner to watch the influx of wealth and fashion. He had a new measure for their grace and beauty now, and as they entered one by one they failed. Once he had a sudden clutching gasp of surprise as a girl passed him, cool and imperious, in her long cloak of chinchilla. He stared. At first he wildly thought his time had come and she was the girl of the picture, but she turned full upon him, and he saw her mouth was selfish, cruel, false. He turned and walked downtown trembling, and after a while passed, still dreaming, into a side street to escape the crowd. He had not gone far when his idly roving eyes encountered a sign on a door reading Madame Oswald, palmist and medium. He stopped and stared at it curiously. Why not for once seek that vulgar shrine, consult the oracle, and illumine his fate? Life of late, while seeming duller of fact, had to his fancy become suddenly stimulated. That fancy must be fed. A mere portrait could no longer satisfy him. He was in a mood for romance, and here was one of romance's immemorial priestesses. He slowly ascended the steps, rang the bell, waited. A negro servant opened to him and led him into a front parlor lighted by a single lamp on a table. He sat down, already embarrassed, upon an uncomfortable red plush sofa and gazed fascinated at a huge painted panel on the opposite wall, whereon some audacious amateur had copied some wearied professional's conception of Francesca da Rimini and her lover. The black eyes of the heroine held him till Madame Oswald appeared, massive, blonde, swathed in a purple gown. There were the usual preliminaries, Madame's quick, close scrutiny appraising him at a glance, an attempt to secure a full life reading at double the ordinary price, the production of a velvet pad upon which his hand should rest, and the drone of prophecy began. She prodded his palm with a little ivory pointer, noted extraordinary lines, stars, and mounts, and brought forth her three inevitable themes. The gentleman was of a strangely sensitive nature, and was much misunderstood. He was worried over something, and didn't know quite what to do. He had intuition, psychic power, mediumship, but it was undeveloped. A course of developing seances, now at $5 a week, would bring out unexpected powers. No? Well then, let him ask a question. She leaned back and closed her eyes. Fenton watched her bulky satin chest heave heavily as she breathed. Her large placid face, with its one hairy mole, fascinated him. Then the picture came into his mind, and he asked in a whisper, "Who is she?" "Who is she?" she repeated, as if to some spirit guide. Her voluminous bust expanded in a gasp. She quivered, rolled her head, and finally answered, "I see the letters B.C." She opened her eyes suddenly and shot at him. "Ain't that right?" "Darned if I know," he replied. At that she plucked up courage and went on without hesitation. "B.C.," she repeated. "It's Belle, or Blanche, or Bessie, I ain't sure which, but she's in your life current, and she's attracting you her way. Yes, yes, you're going to marry her, and marry with money, too. I ain't sure if it's hers or yourn, but look out for one thing, and that's a man with a split ear. Don't you trust him. Is they anything else you wanted to know? 50 cents, please." Fenton never paid the fee, for no sooner had she spoken than with a terrified expression she jumped up and ran to the window. She turned back to him a large, white, anguished face. "My God, the police! They're a-goin' to pull me!" She began to pluck at her breast and moan. Fenton rose, beginning to be frightened himself. "What the devil's the matter?" He grabbed up his hat and his coat. "Oh, I knew they was a-roundin' up the mediums and palmists this week," she cried, "but I come across with my tacks to the captain all right, only last Tuesday, and he swore they'd never touch me. This means $100 out for me, and I ain't got 10. Say, kid, you get out quick or they'll hold you for a witness. I don't want no more evidence than I can help. Hurry, for God's sake. Get out through the back parlor, there." Even as she spoke the front door bell rang, and the handle was rattled to enforce the summons. Fenton did not stay to see the issue, but ran in between the folding doors to a room cluttered by feminine garments in scandalous disorder. He opened a door into the hall, but on the instant heard the officers entering. He could not escape that way. If he could not find some other exit he would be caught like a rat in a trap. He darted to the window and saw a fire escape landing. Out he climbed. The backyard showed no feasible route of egress. He ran up the iron ladder, peered into a window, tried it and found it locked, then hurried up to the next floor. Here the window was opened and the room lighted. He glanced in and gave a suppressed cry of surprise. Stooping down to the floor, a woman, dressed in Russian sables, was gathering into a traveling bag by handfuls a profusion of gems that scattered upon the carpet made the place a miracle by the vivid flashes of red, blue, yellow, and green that dazzled his eyes. There must have been in all some 200 precious stones, set and unset, rings, bracelets, necklaces, pins, and pendants. Where there was not the prismatic fire of precious stones there was the dull sheen of gold. For the most part the jewels lay in a puddle of gorgeous color, but spattered from this all over the floor single sparks of radiant light twinkled as if a rainbow had exploded in the room and lay in splendid fragments. As he stood there transfixed, the woman turned, caught sight of his white face, and screamed. With a sudden movement she threw herself full length upon the floor like a hen trying to protect her chicks at the approach of a hawk. Fenton was too astonished to think of his own peril, too astonished even to speak. It was the woman who broke the silence. "Who are you, for God's sake?" she moaned. Still Fenton stared, aghast, inarticulate. "Are you a burglar?" His tongue loosened at last. "The house is raided. The police are downstairs. They've got Madame Oswald. What in heaven's name does all this mean?" She paled, she faltered, then with a shocked face arose and stood with her hand to her head as if panic-stricken. Fenton got a good look at her now and saw that she was beautiful, with a piquant, eager face, exquisite scarlet lips, and deep brown eyes suffused with tears. Her skin had an olive cast, and her hair was dark. Altogether she was unlike any woman he had ever seen, an exotic type with a sensuous prettiness made delicate, refined by great intelligence. Was she Oriental? There was at least something tropical about her beauty. It was too vivid, too moving for an Anglo-Saxon. She had stood staring at him, thinking intently. Now she darted to the window and laid a gracile hand upon his arm as she looked sharply into his face. She spoke under her breath. "You look honest and brave. Will you help me? I have not a moment to lose if the police are in the house. Quick!" Without waiting an answer, she dragged him over the window sill into the room. Before he had collected his wits, she was scrabbling the jewels from the floor and loading them into his pockets. "I swear I am innocent of any crime!" she exclaimed passionately, as she gathered a handful of diamonds, rubies, and emeralds from the floor and dropped them into his overcoat pocket. "You've got to help me out. There is no one else to save me, and the honor of a great family." She ran to the door, listened, and returned with compressed lips to stoop for more jewels. They dripped from her fingers as she rose, great drops of iridescent color, the hues of blood and poison, to be gathered again in her little hands. "All I want is that these things should be restored to their rightful owner. Why, if the police find them here, it will be awful. I can never explain. A terrible scandal will come out." Again she scraped up, her hands full, chains of fire opals, brooches of carved emeralds, topazes and sapphires, a tiny enameled watch, a half-dozen rings, dazzling with rubies. Already his inside pockets were full, the stones pressed hard against his sides. She opened the flaps of his outside pockets and thrust in more gems. "Don't ask any questions. There's no time. I hope to God you can get away safe. You must do your best. I am being followed, but they won't suspect you. Now then, be quick." By this time the last jewel was concealed, and Fenton, his coat bulging with the treasure, stood before her, pale and trembling with excitement. Just then there came a noise from the stairway, a bang upon the hall door. "Out the window!" she hissed. "Get away somehow, for heaven's sake, and meet me at Scheffel Hall, and wait till I come." In another instant she had hustled him out onto the fire escape, shut the window behind him, and turned off the gas. As he climbed the next flight of iron steps, out of sight, he heard the pounding on the door grow louder. Someone was shouting for her to open. Chapter 2